So welcome everybody. So I'm guest hosting Rainforest this afternoon. So give me one moment and we will get started. And make sure you're sharing for sound. Oh, sorry, one thing I need to grab real quick.
Just a heads up, you are sharing your whole screen when we're seeing that.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to grab those links beforehand so that way I don't have to go back and forth later.
Cool,
And
just
then,
making sure for privacy side.
yeah. So I'll just put all the links that are relevant for today into the chat, and then I'll mention each of them as they become topical. So welcome everybody. So to go through the usual introductions today, we'll start off with our land acknowledgement. And I'm actually coming to you from Platform Calgary, which is right by the confluence of the Bow and the Elbow River, which does have a particular significance for the land acknowledgement.
Growing up, my grandma always told me that the land took care of us and it still is taking care of us, and it never asked for anything back.
It is a way of life to always honor the environment. It's not something that you just can turn on and off. It's a living daily lifestyle.
And land acknowledgement is a way to acknowledge that we're coexisting in this land with the native people, and we should acknowledge that this is actually their traditional territory. But at the same time, we are all guests to this land.
The land plays a big factor in who we are. That's what makes us strong. That's what makes us strong people.
All right, and then just to go through the land acknowledgement on a little bit more of a direct note. So in the spirit of reconciliation, we're acknowledging that we live, work, and play on the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, which includes the Siksika, the Kainai, and the McKinney, as well as the Tsuut'ina, the Stoney Lakota Nations, and Métis Nation Region 3, and all the people who make their homes in Treaty 7 of Southern Alberta. And if we have anybody coming in from Edmonton area, we also want to acknowledge the traditional lands of the Treaty 6 territory of the Cree, the Dene, the Blackfoot, the Salu, and the Nakota Sioux, as well as the Métis. These are sacred gathering places, and they provide us the opportunity to engage in and demonstrate leadership on reconciliation. So again, I always want to thank everyone for joining their commitment to truth and reconciliation from the Rainforest community. And then we've got the video that we typically play at the beginning to introduce everybody to Rainforest.
To realize an idea, or for a seed to sprout? At Rainforest Alberta, we know the answer is rooted in trust. Traditionally, Albertans have cultivated their ideas in established systems. Inputs that don't fit these systems are weeded out. Opportunities for growth are missed. But now, Albertans want a dynamic landscape that can evolve organically, like a rainforest. At Rainforest Alberta, we believe a culture of trust is the fertile soil where ideas grow. Our budding innovation ecosystem is a network of relationships pulling each other up as they push forward in their own field. Trust breaks down barriers. An open, inclusive network increases collaborative innovation. Successful breakthroughs inspire new ideas. A cycle begins. Rainforest Alberta is a movement to amplify trust by cultivating honesty, inclusion, and accountability. How? Our social contract holds us accountable to demonstrate trust across the province. We meet to have honest conversations around collaboration. This leads to more inclusive spaces for everyone to fearlessly build new ideas together. By raising the standard of trust, Alberta's ideas, talent, and resources can be evergreen. Visit rainforestab.ca to sign the social contract and start growing together.
So again, at Rainforest, we use the 6 pillars to guide our conversations in order to make sure that we're upholding the integrity and the values of our ecosystem so that we can all collaborate and grow together. One thing that Rainforest is doing right now is a scorecard assessment. So I'll put the link here into the chat again. It is the very first link in the set of 3 that I provided there. If you have the opportunity, I highly recommend clicking that link quickly to do the scorecard if you haven't already. This gives really critical feedback about what the perceptions of the ecosystem are, where there's areas that we need to improve, where we need to grow, as well as recognizing our successes over the course of the last year. Again, if you're able to take a few minutes to do that, perhaps not right now, but once you hang up from this call, that would be greatly appreciated. And please, if you can, share it with your networks. We want to get this out to as many people as possible so we can get as representative of a sample of our ecosystem as we can when trying to understand where we have made positive strides and where we still have further to go. So in addition to the link that's in the chat, there's also the QR code that you can scan there for anyone that feels it's more comfortable to do that rather than going through the link. Give everyone a couple minutes there. And we have one more announcement from the Rainforest group. So tomorrow at 4 p.m. here at Platform Calgary, there's going to be Innovation in YYC, which is going to talk about some of the metrics that we're collecting and have a bit of a panel discussion in order to look at, that's from the chat. So if you have the opportunity, that's the second link that I sent out there. I'll repaste it into the chat so it's fresh for everybody. If you have the chance to attend, we greatly appreciate it. I believe this will be in the Investors Lounge here at Platform Calgary tomorrow at 4 o'clock. If you have any questions, please direct this to Amber and Bridget. I just got told about this as of yesterday.
Is there a registration for this? Do you know?
I believe that's in the link. I think it's using the Luma platform for registration, or
Thank
at least
you.
for collecting registrations. Awesome. And then just a few housekeeping items. Feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. I saw that Alan had already done that. It's always good to acknowledge what you're working on and what you can offer towards the community. Again, keeping in mind with the social contract, the more you give, the more that you'll get. So putting forward what you're able to provide and be able to help support other people will in turn create an environment of abundance to allow us all to thrive together. We also highly encourage you to connect with other people through the chats, going into the DMs. It's always nice to know that there's a handful of side conversations and that there's additional collisions happening even in this virtual space. If at all possible, we recommend having your camera on. It's always nice to present to a group of faces and not a set of black screens. That being said, if you can't have your camera on, we totally understand for any particular reason. And as much as possible, try to ask questions. This is meant to be a discussion. As much as I can talk and listen to myself for the next 45 minutes, I'd really rather not. I like hearing from other people, making it a little bit more interactive. So that's the hope for today. And if you're not on the Slack Rainforest already, feel free to connect there and follow up with the conversations. And I think on that note, and I think this is, yeah, and this is the link to the social contract in case someone has not already signed it. Again, this is Rainforest's way of trying to uphold those values and make sure that they're circulating in the way that we conduct business and support one another. So if you haven't already, again, highly recommend signing the contract. And I believe that gives you access to a lot of the different resources through Rainforest. Additionally, Rainforest is using Inkly as a digital space for community building. So if you have not already signed up for the Inkly platform, there's a QR code to do so. There you can ask questions and be connected with other people in order to help advance whatever goals or challenges or that you might be facing. I got to see Rebecca give a very brief shout out for Inkly today on your platform. And she was saying that right now there is 39 questions posed on the platform and over 96 responses. So roughly every question is getting a rough about 3 answers. So again, I think that really does go towards describing the community of abundance that we're building here in Calgary. Highly encourage everyone to join into that space and be able to further connect. And on that note, I'm going to switch over to the presentation that I'll be doing today.
You're doing a good job, man. You're like the.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, except of course it starts all the way there. So my apologies if I'm giving anyone nausea. Yeah. So thank you. I actually don't think I introduced myself, and you don't already know me. You probably don't know that since my name tag is showing up as Rainforest, Alberta. But I'm Dr. Ty McKinney, co-founder and CEO of Bit Cortex. So I'll be talking to you a little bit about my company today and the cost of burnout and how it's something that we should all keep in mind with respect to our own companies and organizations that we're working with. You may also recognize me as the research director for Branch Out Neurological Foundation. That's how I've had the most long-term engagement with the Alberta innovation ecosystem, where we fund innovative early stage neuroscience research, trying to help get ideas out of the lab and into the market where they can start having a real world impact. So I want to start off with just acknowledging the cost of burnout in financial terms. A lot of us are business owners. A lot of us have managed budgets some capacity and led teams. And burnout is one of those things that's an insidious cost that is quite typically often present, but not something that we necessarily realize is always there. Working with some data from KPMG, we're able to get a more refined understanding of exactly what the cost of burnout is. So let's just say, for instance, you have a 50-employee tech company. I imagine there's a handful of those around Calgary. Based on the data, we would expect that there's roughly a 10% turnover. Oh, sorry, a 10% turnover rate. Let me just go back there. There's roughly a 10% voluntary turnover rate. So these are not people that are being fired from their jobs. These are people that are deciding that they want to work somewhere else or not work at all for a period of time because the stress, the inconvenience, the challenges, the culture of the job is just not fitting for them, and they want something different. So they're voluntarily leaving their positions. And as a result, the companies then start to incur the cost of that turnover. A good rule of thumb is that it costs the average company approximately $10,000 per employee per year if they're about a mid-level as far as experience and training that requires for their staff. So that's quite the cost. So if you think about that for your own teams, it might not be quite that high for every individual team. Some teams might be higher, some teams might be lower, but overall, this is a cost that we're all paying in some capacity. And it's a cost we don't necessarily need to be paying. So if we actually break that down a little bit, we can see where those costs are coming from. So to start off with, there's the idea of absenteeism. So this is when your mental health might not be particularly good that day, and you just don't show up to work. You take a sick day. So typically the company would still be paying for your time anyway. So that's a cost that they are now incurring. They're paying for you to not work because of the health challenges that you're experiencing. This can also be a little more subtle in the form of presenteeism, where you do show up to work. However, you're not 100% engaged, not at your full capacity, and it's more difficult for you to accomplish your goals and stay focused and attentive to what you need to do. So this is another, again, insidious way that burnout starts charging companies attacks. If the burnout is left untreated, it can from there escalate to short-term disability claims. So these are obviously, again, can be quite expensive. Usually this tends to be a cost that the insurance company will be covering, but then it will start to get reflected in higher premiums year over year. And again, if these problems are not properly managed, the cost can continue to escalate. So then you can get the turnover where you have those unfilled positions. So now you're losing the productivity of those people for the long term. They're likely not coming back. And as a result, you have to rehire them. And as any business owner or HR professional knows, rehiring is expensive. It costs a lot of money, it costs a lot of time, and it can be a drain on the talent within an organization. So these costs are all starting to add up quite a bit. And then finally, if things are still not properly managed over the long term, this will result in higher insurance premiums. And this is not only for the direct cost of covering mental health challenges for employees that might be experiencing that, but also for comorbid medical conditions that they might otherwise have. The scientific evidence is very clear that if you struggle with mental health challenges, you're likely going to also struggle with some of your physical health challenges as well. And over the long term, those costs will typically accumulate in the form of not being as proactive about managing medical costs. And as a result, you're going to have more complications for any diseases or health challenges you might have later on in life. And that will contribute towards a higher insurance premiums for the company. So overall, burnout is expensive and not something that we really want floating around our organizations. Before I continue on, does anyone have any quick questions about the cost of burnouts?
I just, quick question, and we don't have to answer it all right now, but there are some employers that I've talked to that have young people in their organizations, and some of this, they're saying, becomes an excuse for proactively lazy people who really just don't want to work.
So that's a very complicated question. I guess
you don't have to put the answer out there right now. I just think it's worthwhile for people to consider.
No, so there is an answer that I can give somewhat succinctly, and then I'm hoping that over the course of this presentation, I'll be able to illustrate some of the ways in which we can be a little bit more nuanced about it. But basically, the mental health literature is very clear. If you want people to overcome those challenges, they need to be held accountable and they need to be invested in their own recovery. That is necessary. You cannot have recovery from mental health without those factors in place. The individual has to drive their own boat. That being said, if they're driving a boat in a very stormy sea, it doesn't matter how good they are, how much effort they're putting in, their efforts might be completely undermined. So you need to have both the individual engaged with trying to remediate those challenges, as well as an environment that is supportive for them trying to overcome those challenges. And when you have both of those together, that's when you're most effectively able to manage these burnout costs. That being said, to your point, Pete, those are often viewed as being in opposition. How can you hold people to account and be supportive at the same time? That somewhat goes against some of the cultural trends that we're seeing. And I think this is where the nuanced discussion really comes into play. So today I'll be talking specifically about ADHD as an example of how these can play out. And hopefully over the course of this presentation, we'll be able to get into some of those bigger details on how you can specifically try to facilitate this within your own companies and organizations. Michael, I see a hand up there.
Super good answer. Thank you, Ty.
Oh, for sure. I've thought long and hard about this.
I just wanted to add,
yep.
I've experienced burnout myself back in 2019 when I was working full time. And yeah, like after 4 months, I couldn't concentrate on my tasks. Like I became super tired and I left the job. But in retrospect, I think because I think that I think a lot of people think that their employers are very rigid in their, like they think that if they ask for like a break or something, that their employer won't offer it to them, won't give it to them. So in retrospect, I think it would have been a good idea to tell my employer that I'm feeling tired and I'm burnt out and ask for a break rather than just quit the job. So.
No, 100%. Thank you for sharing that, Michael. I know it's not always easy to disclose those kinds of things, but I think, again, your experience actually shows quite nicely for this hierarchy of costs. So it sounds like you had burnout and it resulted in you having to leave the position. But again, if you were at the absenteeism or the presenteeism stage, you potentially could have taken some short-term disability, which is still costly for the company, but not nearly as costly as the rehiring costs after you would have left. So again, wherever we can have these conversations and with a safe space and be proactive about these challenges, it tends to benefit all parties overall. That being said, I do completely acknowledge that stigma is still a thing, and it's difficult to put yourself in these vulnerable positions. So I think that's why it's really important that we recognize people that are brave when it happens, and wherever possible, try to make people feel like they can have that safe space for these topics.
Yeah, being brave, that's a good point. But like so few people are actually like, tenacious enough to tell like their manager, whoever, right? Like I was working for the CTO, so there was nobody higher than him. So, I made that mistake now, so now I have to live with it. But yeah.
In the interest of time, I'm going to continue on, but I think we'll probably get into some of these topics a little bit later on. So now I'm going to dive into a little bit more of the science that underlies burnout. So more or less, there's 3 broad components of burnout that we've identified. So I'll go through each of these in turn, but broadly speaking, it's chronic stress. After the pandemic, I think this is something we're all somewhat familiar with. There's this idea of reduced cognition. The fact that your brain not be operating as full capacity, and as a result, you're not going to be able to achieve the outcomes that you're otherwise hoping. So that's a cognitive manifestation. And there's also the development of cynical attitudes that can really start to eat away at the social support that you might have. So in my experience, these tend to be somewhat of sequential stages, but that's not universally true. Some people might experience the reduced cognition before they realize their stress. Some people might realize that their attitudes are changing before the other ones set in. So this is why it's really important to understand how these can start to manifest within yourself. Be able to do a quick self check-ins to test and see whether or not you're experiencing some burnout, and then trying to be proactive in mitigating it. We'll dive a little bit deeper into each of those. So to start off with, we have this idea of chronic stress. And I want to differentiate that from acute stress. Acute stress is actually super helpful for us. It's got evolution advantages. As you can see from this meme, let's imagine that you're doing some cycling in Banff National Park and you encounter a bear. Scary scenario, something that hopefully doesn't happen very often. But if it were to happen, your HP axis, your stress response system would kick in and pump out the stress hormone cortisol. And this would motivate you. It would give you the energy and the drive that you need to break your personal record and escape from that bear. I see Pete has put a bear on for his background, so sounds like he's had some encounters. So this is what acute stress looks like. It's overall very helpful and adaptive, and it's helped our species survive up until this point. Where things start to go wrong is where this acute stress starts to become a little bit more chronic. So normally our stress response system has a pattern that looks like this top component of the figure, where we get stressed out and then we relax, we de-stress, we decompress, and we have a period of recovery before we get stressed out again. And there's this oscillatory pattern where your stress levels are going up and down, up and down. That's normal, that's healthy, that's how our species has evolved to survive. But what tends to happen in a lot of our current societies and the way that our lives are structured is we get into this chronic stress state where we get stressed out, we don't have the opportunity to get a full recovery. So as a result, we don't get back down to our proper baseline. And in fact, now we have a new baseline that's somewhat elevated. So now those stress hormones, that cortisol that's floating around, they're sticking around a little bit longer, and this starts to cause added disruption. So I could go off for literally hours about how that can be problematic for your physical health, for your mental health. That's a bit of a conversation for another day. What I really want to press on you at this point is that once you start getting into that chronic stress state, that it's unhealthy and it's going to result in whatever medical challenges you're experiencing becoming worse, which is something that I don't think anyone wants to have to deal with. But as those hormones are floating around in your body, some of them are going to make their way to your brain. And this is where they're going to start to impact your ability to think, to do reasoning, and to emotionally connect with one another. So there's one brain network that I'm particularly fond of called the frontal parietal singular precular network. I like to call it the focus network because, as you can tell, it's a little bit easier to say. And as scientists, we love acronyms. And this network does a lot of really important things for us. The first thing that it does is it helps us inhibit impulses. which is a fundamental cognitive skill to allow us to resist temptations, to be able to stay true on our long-term goals. And when we have these stress hormones floating around and interacting with our brain, this network isn't able to function at its full capacity. So as a result, we're going to be much less effective at our long-term goals. We're going to be much less effective at resisting distractions, and we're going to be much less effective at being able to have a sense of integrity, whatever that might mean for you. And this has some consequences for the workplace. If I can get either a quick show of hands or to put in the chat, how many people have to attend to details for their work? That's an important component of being able to do your job, is attending to particular kinds of details. See, a couple people are raising their hands there. Got a few people popping in the chat all the time. Yeah, so I'm guessing almost everyone, or the vast majority of people, will likely end up raising their hand to this at some point, depending on the nature of their job. And again, if you're not able to resist, or you're not able to inhibit those distractions, you're not going to be able to attend to those details. So as a result, your job performance is going to start to suffer. So that'll make it more difficult for you to do your job. You're probably going to fall behind on some of your duties and responsibilities. And again, that's going to start to create more stress, which then makes this a feed-forward cycle. So everything's going to start getting worse and worse. If those stress hormones continue on, that brain network is also important for emotional regulation. So if you aren't able to emotionally regulate, then you can start to develop cynical attitudes. And this is where our relationships can start to break down. Social support is a really critical source of stress management. But when you get so stressed out that you're not able to properly leverage that resource, it can again start to have really problematic consequences, not just for your social relationships, but again for your physical and mental health as well. Because again, this is going to have those stress hormones continue to float around. You're going to continue to have those challenges with your thinking and your reasoning, and those challenges with connecting with one another and being able to empathize. And that's going to continue to spiral to spiral to spiral. And that's why burnout can be so problematic and expensive. So really what we're trying to do is trying to find ways that we can interrupt that cycle at some point. So based on the KPMG report that I cited earlier, they identified that there's 5 major reasons why people are voluntarily leaving their jobs. So what's driving that turnover? The first one is compensation. You're not being paid enough for the stress that you're being asked to do. That one's fairly straightforward. The next one is low benefits. So again, your benefits are your opportunity to have resources to manage your health challenges in multiple ways. And if you don't have proper benefits, or the benefits aren't doing what they're supposed to do for you, again, that's going to contribute towards your mental health challenges and the likelihood of burnout. The next one, I think this one was really accelerated by the pandemic, with this idea of work flexibility, that we don't actually have to be in the office for specific periods of time for all roles, that there might actually be some degree of flexibility depending on the nature of your job. And increasingly we're realizing that that is an option, and that being denied that option, if it is feasible, can contribute towards that sense of burnout and result in the desire to leave your job. The next one is job security. Is your company going to succeed this up and coming recession? Do you feel like your contributions to the company are valued such that they're not going to fire you? Or do you feel ambiguous about whether or not you want to stay with the company? Those can all contribute towards a burnout-driven turnover. And then the final one is work culture. Do you actually like your job and the people that you work with? I would like to think that we're all slowly finding our way into positions where that is the case, but that's not always the case. And again, if you have a toxic work culture, that can really drive people towards burnout and the mental health challenges associated with it. Just before I move on, there's a couple questions that popped up into the chat here. So I wonder, how much burnout do solopreneurs have how much burnout do solopreneurs have than those working in teams and in companies? I think that's supposed to be like a comparison. There's no simple answer to that. It really depends on the individual. Some people are more introverted. They prefer to work alone. That's how they thrive. Some people are more extroverted and really do demand the connections from the people around them in order to feel secure and be able to manage their stress. So yeah, so that'll really depend on the person, the people that they're working with. Even if you're extroverted, if your team's not nice, it might not matter. And then, does burnout lead to depression, low self-esteem, and hopelessness? Short answer is yes. There's a lot of nuance in how it gets there, but short answer is yes. So what I really want to spend the rest of the time today talking about is how this idea of neurodiversity is actually underlying a lot of the drivers of burnout that we're experiencing and seeing play out in the workforce. So here I highlighted all those factors that in some way can be directly attributed to this concept of neurodiversity. So that's 4 out of the 5. So that's something that we should be paying attention to and trying to see if we can remediate in some capacity. But you might be asking, what exactly is neurodiversity? Well, it's diversity in brain functioning. It's acknowledging the fact that your brain is wired ever so slightly different than the next square beside you in the Zoom call, and that you're going to have different strengths, you're going to have different weaknesses, and as a result, there's going to be different things that are going to help you you thrive and survive. So really, I think about this as not having a one-size-fits-all policy. A one-size-fits-all policy is inevitably going to leave some people behind. So with respect to diversity and inclusion initiatives, really it starts off by acknowledging that there is differences in the way that our brains are structured and function. And as a result, that there is often a lack of equity in opportunities as a result of that. If you are someone that's moderately that gets stressed out relatively easily and you're fairly conscientious and detail orientated, your neurodiversity is much more likely to push you up the corporate ladder compared to someone that is much more timid, prone to anxiety, and is not going to be as willing to self-advocate in order to push themselves up the corporate ladder. So again, because of these differences in our brain structure and functioning, it produces inequities in a number of different outcomes. Mental health being one of them, as was previously raised up in the chat. And that we can be very proactive and try to be inclusive for neurodiverse individuals, and that this not only benefits them, but it tends to benefit everyone. So we're going to walk through exactly what this can look like in a very specific circumstance. Because neurodiversity underlies a lot of the mental health challenges that we're starting to play out within particularly younger generations. For those that are Zoomers and millennials, as well as older generations that might be under higher degrees of stress. And then Pete has a question there. I've read that many other studies indicate that people quit because of bad managers. Where does that fit in? So I think that really fits into on that previous slide, the culture component. Again, if you have managers that don't know how to manage you as a unique individual, and they're assuming that you are going to be a carbon copy of the next person beside you, that's likely going to cause tension, going to cause some stress, and could lead towards someone saying, I just don't want to work for this company. I like the work that I'm doing. I like the mission that I'm doing. I feel good at it, but I just can't stand my manager. They frustrate me and make me feel stupid, and I don't want to feel stupid, so I'm going to leave. So I think that's how bad management can filter into this problem.
That's right.
So now we're going to go back to this idea of executive functioning. So that frontal parietal network, the focus network that I was talking earlier, it's super important for a lot of different things. And dopamine is a really critical neurotransmitter for this brain network to be able to turn on. So what I'm going to go through the next few slides is exactly what that looks like in greater detail, so we can appreciate how the underlying brain science links up to the psychology, and then by extension, the business strategy, so how we can try to mitigate this burnout risk within our organizations. So again, at the very fundamental level, our focus network allows us to inhibit impulses. Quick show of hands, put it in the chat. How many people can eat a single Lay's potato chip? I see a lot. Oh, we got one person raise their hand. Got one person acknowledging not. We got 2 people raising their hand. So that's 2 out of what is it, 28 that we currently have. So those of you that raise your hand, you have superpowers. You have a very well-developed frontal parietal network. The rest of us, we might struggle with this because again, it goes down to that impulse inhibition. If you're trying to only eat one single potato chip and you fail, you can blame your focus network. That's what's producing that particular behavior. But that's perhaps not the most exciting application of this brain network. Again, what I was saying is if your ability to inhibit those impulses, then you're able to instead focus on your long-term goals, which is much more concrete for many of us. That's something much more tangible. But again, if your focus network isn't functioning at its peak capacity, you'll get distracted from those goals. In some cases by literally everything else, as is indicated by this meme. And then again, coming back to that idea of attention to detail. Again, if you're not able to have this network operating at its full capacity, you're going to miss details, and this likely is going to impact your job performance. So very quickly, does everyone feel like they're comfortable with this concept of executive functioning before I start talking about how it relates to dopamine? Any quick questions about that? All right, moving on. So there is a curvilinear relationship to dopamine and executive functioning. Basically, you want it like Goldilocks. You don't want too much, you don't want too little, you want just the right amount. But how much is the right amount, you say? Well, that is a complicated question. This is where we get into this idea of neurodiversity a little bit more deeply. So we've all heard about the term that there's some people are extroverts, some people are introverts. On average, people that are introverted tend to have a little bit of higher dopamine at baseline. So for them to get into their peak zone of performance, they actually need to find ways to reduce the excitement in their environment a little bit. So as a result, they're going to probably prefer to work from home or work from spaces where they can feel very controlled in their environment. There's not a lot of distractions, very quiet, very peaceful. Those are the kinds of environments and conditions that are going to help people that are more on the introverted side of the spectrum be able to function in their best way. That's what's going to help their focus network turn on, and they're going to be able to attend to details and eat the single lace potato chip. On the flip side, we can have people that are more extroverted. On average, people that are extroverted tend to have a little less dopamine at baseline. So in fact, they tend to need a lot of the opposite of what's going on. So they're going to need scenarios where there's a little bit more energy within the environment. They're going to tend to prefer working in office settings. They're going to tend to enjoy a lot more social interaction. They're probably going to enjoy music or other kinds of background noise going on. And those are the kinds of things that often will facilitate people that are more extroverted for being able to get into their Goldilocks zone and be able to have their executive functioning at their peak capacity. So now we're going to do a very quick demo. So I'm going to have everyone scan the QR code. I'm going to put the links into the chat again. It's the last link that's there. So my company is building an app in order to gamify mental wellness tracking. So this link will take you to a very quick survey. It's only 10 questions. And if you fill that out, we'll have an opportunity towards the very end to look at the extroversion and introversion distribution of the Rainforest group that's currently on the call. So again, I'll give everyone a couple seconds there to scan the QR code or to use that final link. If by chance you're having some technical difficulty, you can go to the URL that's listed right there. You can go to the settings page and add ADHD4 lowercase as the organization code. So I'll just give everyone a few minutes to go through that. And if anyone's having any challenges or questions, please feel free to either put it into the chat or unmute yourself. But I've done this demo a handful of times now, and it usually goes fairly smoothly. And then once you've finished up, if you just want to give a thumbs up or let me know in the chat, I'll use that kind of as the meter for whether or not this needs a little bit more time.
Is it forcing us to come in with a password, Ty?
It's asking to make an account.
Yes. When you sign up for this, there'll be 3 additional emails that you'll get over the course of the next couple of days, just giving you the invitation to explore other aspects of your neurodiversity. So that's what the account is for.
Yeah.
I recommend using Google. That's the most easy and straightforward, assuming you know your passwords or your browser remembers it for you.
Your QR code is not working.
Oh, it's not working?
Yep, it's not working for me though.
It was working. It was working for me. I'm actually on my phone signing up right now.
I can't get in either.
I can't.
I use the link and it seems to work.
Yeah, there's a link in the chat. I know sometimes QR codes can be a little fussy depending on the screen that it's being presented on, that sort of thing. So my apologies if it's not working for everybody.
All right.
Sorry, which questionnaire did you say?
It's telling me that the authentication when I try to sign up with Google fails.
Oh.
Does not like me.
I was gonna say that's a new bug. I'll follow up with you back channel for that.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, and as an early stage tech company, there's always random bugs that pop up that we discover every time a sufficiently diverse group of people use a sufficiently diverse group of technology.
We never have that problem at Mission X.
No?
No, all the time, dude.
Which questionnaire are we doing? The extroversion one?
Yes. Yeah, I believe it should automatically direct you there.
Yeah, it didn't. It gave me an option of a bunch of different ones, but I've got it now.
Yeah, so in the interest of time, I'll keep moving forward as people are finishing up those questionnaires. Again, my apologies to anyone that had any glitches along the way. But more or less, you can think about ADHD as a very extreme version of extroversion, where these are people where they've got really low levels of dopamine at baseline. So you can think about it in that capacity. So a lot of the things that typically would benefit an extroverted person will benefit a person with ADHD, but it just might need to be a little bit more than you might otherwise anticipate. So they're really low on this inverted U curve. So as a result, people with ADHD, they come up with ways to make their lives more exciting. So they find ways to give themselves dopamine. One way that they do that is they tend to have lots of different things on the go. So people with ADHD tend to be very good at multitasking. Not multitasking in the sense that you're good at doing it, but multitasking in the sense they shuffle around, they're able to wear many different hats, they're able to switch tasks better than most people. But this is at the trade-off is that it makes it harder for them to focus on an individual task. So again, there's a trade-off there. That's really key within this idea of neurodiversity. So we can then elaborate out and think about what are some of the other trade-offs that are present for people with ADHD and link it back to the neuroscience so it's a little bit more objective and hopefully a little less judgy or value-laden. So again, because people tend to, with ADHD, tend to have low levels of dopamine at baseline, they're really drawn towards seeking out dopamine within their environment. So as a result, they're very driven by rewards. And sometimes this can lead them to being willing to take risks. This is one of the reasons why people with ADHD actually make fabulous entrepreneurs, is that they're willing to take the risks in order to get those big rewards that other people might not necessarily be willing to do. A lot of times people with ADHD experience some degree of challenges within their early childhood. There's an environmental component that comes towards that. So as a result, people with ADHD are often very stress adapted. They function very well in dynamic, stressful environments that are very fast paced. So you can often put people with ADHD into stressful scenarios, and they're not going to be nearly as impacted as compared to a neurotypical person. So again, that's a strength that they often have. But on the flip side, they might not perform very well if they don't have much pressure on them. So if there's not enough motivation, there's not enough accountability present that's stressing them out, they might not actually thrive at their full capacity. So again, it's all about the trade-off. David, yes. To your question in the chat, it is inspired by the Lorenz attractor from chaos theory. And then the final one is, as we're talking about, is with respect to the focus network. People with ADHD, their focus network tends to not be quite as effective at communicating internally. So as a result, this makes it harder for them to focus on individual things. But again, the flip side is, as a result, they tend to be much better at juggling between different responsibilities. So as we can see, when we look at ADHD through the lens of neurodiversity, it's not necessarily a good or a bad thing. It's just a different thing. And a good manager is someone that's going to recognize those differences and find ways to facilitate the job role, facilitate the team environment and the working environment to help them maximize their strengths and find ways to supplement their weaknesses. I'll open this up for a brief discussion since we got a few minutes left. What's one way that you think you could support somebody with ADHD within your own team? I'll start off the conversation and I'll say administrative support. If you can provide administrative support for people with ADHD to help keep them organized, help keep their time management on track, so that way they just have, checklists they need to go through, that's going to solve a lot of problems. But I'm curious what other people think.
Education. I think a big part of getting people's brains so that they understand themselves is just very much what you're doing right here is education on what makes us tick, and then of course self-discovery of how that all fits together.
No, 100%. Yeah. So it's a lot of understanding yourself, and by extension, by better understanding yourself, you can understand others. If you recognize that you have some of these tendencies, it can make you more empathetic towards other people that have ADHD. And on the flip side, it might help you appreciate how other people have complementary strengths and you can work together. There's a couple hands up, Steve and Robert. I think Robert had your hand up first.
Yeah, so I actually do have this condition, and I would just say that this might sound kind of petty, but people are kind of dollying around and talking really slow in a presentation and kind of just wasting a lot of time. It's kind of painful. I'll just put it that way. Yeah.
So I think the point that you're making there is like, if you're engaging with somebody with ADHD in meetings, try to keep it quick and snappy, get it to the point, so that way you're not given the opportunity to get distracted by letting them get bored.
Kind of. I mean, I can give an example. I've been learning closure script with a buddy of mine that he already knows that, and he's trying to teach it to me by just having me kind of passively sit and then just listen to him talk on a screen for like an hour and a half, and that's just not gonna sink in. It's much easier if if I have an actual task to do, I guess.
Yeah. So active learning as opposed to passive learning, 100%. That's true for everyone, but for people with ADHD in particular. Okay. And then Steve, I think you were next.
Yeah, I think communication helps. So if you're I started taking meds for ADHD about 1.5 years ago. So you have this med window, and then sometimes you'll just fall right off when the meds are worn off. So I think that if you have communication and you understand when you're the best, it really helps as well.
100%. So again, knowing your strengths and knowing your limitations. If you're taking ADHD medication, it might be really effective 9 to 5, but once the medication wears off at 6, you're just kind of shot. So maybe that's not the best time to pick up your detail-oriented hobby. And then Jeff, you have your hand up as well.
Yeah, so I'm obviously distracted because I don't know which one of these questionnaires I'm supposed to fill out.
Oh, the extroversion one. That's the one that has the most direct link for ADHD within the neurodiversity perspective.
Okay, I see like ADHD screening tool, ACE, emotional awareness, personality.
It should be personality extroversion.
Okay. Got it. Okay, thank you.
Okay. And then we had one comment in the chat here from Ross. So schedule, distraction, and multitasking breaks and working on collaborative projects. So yeah, so it's time management again being a really important component. If you know that you're only going to have, say, a 20-minute attention span, don't schedule a 60-minute working session where you're planning on going all the way through. That's going to be setting yourself up for failure. You're going to feel bad when you don't accomplish that, when you could do 20-minute sections with, short break in between, where you have the opportunity to, get your mind reorientated and then re-engage. That can help make the project much more tractable. So really good suggestion. Pomodoro method, yeah. All right. So then just very briefly, I want to mention, so over the next couple of days, you will get a truncated version of the demo that Bit Cortex does. Normally we do 7 engagements, so for you guys, it's only going to be a few days, where again, each day you'll get an email that'll prompt you to fill out another questionnaire to explore a different aspect of your neurodiversity. It's not required, obviously, but if you're interested and curious, that's one way that you can start to learn a little bit more about yourself around the neurodiversity that's relevant for ADHD. And then the way that we would use this within a corporate setting is that we would do these wellness sprints in order to collect data from people over the course of 7 days. So break down what you would often do over the course of an engagement survey into 10 minutes a day or less. Then we'll compile a report from that and then do a workshop in order to share the results with leadership and, if at all possible, with the rest of the team. So that way everyone's on the same page for understanding whatever the burnout risk is for that company, as well as what are the culture and system processes in place that can be used to remediate that risk and be able to give data-driven solutions towards that. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing for just a moment again. All right, so can you guys see that there? So this is the personality profile for the Rainforest group based on everyone that signed up for that wellness sprint. So overall, we're pretty extroverted, which, given that this is a group about innovation and entrepreneurs, that kind of makes sense. This group in particular is 2 standard deviations above the mean. So that suggests we're actually quite extroverted on average. So this is getting to the point where you're going to start to see some of those trade-offs are going to be a little bit more pronounced. So where some of the extroverted tendencies might actually be problematic in a few settings. So again, being mindful of some of those supports and ways to really be supportive for people that are like that can be quite helpful. And then to whoever the handful of people that filled out the neuroticisms scale as well, looks like we're quite neurotic. So we're very sensitive to stress. And again, that particular combination tends to drive people to solve problems because they get stressed out by problems and they're motivated to do things to solve the problem. So that's representative of entrepreneurs. So that's all I had for right now. So I'll stop sharing. And I want to open up the space to see if anyone has any other community announcements. I acknowledge that we're 1 minute past. I want to be mindful of everybody's time. But we did get into some good discussion there. But if anybody has any other community announcements, please feel free to unmute yourself or share them. Ross, looks like you have your hand up.
No, I'm just clapping there. They now animate the Zoom pieces in the corner. When I raise my hand, it'll usually move me to the front of the gallery view.
Oh, okay. Awesome.
I'd like
Thank
to
you so much
announce
for-
that you did an amazing job. Thank you very much, Ty.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, that was really great and insightful.
Yeah, that was good. Thank you.
It was very insightful. It was really great.
Thank you. No, that's the hope, is that, again, we can pair some of this business logic with some science and some solutions that we can really solve this issue of burnout within the workplace. Because I don't think any of us want people to struggle with mental health, yet it's something that we're continuously being bombarded with these challenges. So I think we can all come together, understand ourselves, understand the environments that we're working in, we can really start to make a difference and push the needle.
Well, actually, it's also very helpful for, because I continue to work from this little space all the time. And, sometimes when you feel out of sorts about things, emotional, etc., it's really great to kind of go, oh, okay, I can understand a little bit more about where I'm at and why I feel like that sometimes, and maybe be more proactive about it.
No, 100%. For my own journey, along a similar vein, I often felt frustrated that I felt like I wasn't able to perform at the same level as a lot of my colleagues, particularly in grad school. People that go into clinical psychology PhDs tend to be very conscientious and detail orientated, which was not necessarily the way that I approached things in that setting. So that stressed me out quite a bit. But then once I realized that actually my brain is just wired differently and I have different skill sets, it helped me feel a lot better about it, because then I wasn't trying to measure myself with somebody else's ruler. I was able to be like, okay, you know, these are the things that I'm good at. I'll let them take care of, you know, all those other things. And I'll focus on my strengths.
Awesome. Cool.
Thanks, everybody.
All right. Well, we will see you all next week. And again, thank you so much for everybody that joined and gave us your lunch hour. It was a pleasure getting the chance to speak with you, and I look forward to connecting with you all around the ecosystem.